Thank you, Chris. What a beautiful video. And the thing is, like me, I'm sure you can all remember all of those events. I certainly do. And it's perfect for today's talk. So, again, welcome today as we move into the third week of our series on revolutionary love based on the book See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love by Valerie Kaur, and it fits perfectly as we honor this season for nonviolence. I'm not sure if any of you are Turner Classic movie fans, but last night they aired Gandhi, and I'm sure it was in relation to the season of nonviolence. And if it was just a coincidence, what a wonderful coincidence. Now, this book is the author's personal journey as a Sikh woman experiencing and chronicling the persecution and hate crimes against all those deemed as others, particularly South Asian and Middle Eastern Americans who became targets after the terrorist attack on September 11th. Using her own powerful story, she embraces her Sikh faith to discern and share a way forward, which she calls the way of revolutionary love. Now, to review briefly, Kaur describes revolutionary love as an ethic opposed to an emotion, involving the choice to enter into wonder and labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves in order to heal and transform the world around us. She explains it's not a formal code or prescription, but an orientation to life that is personal and rooted in joy, and is a force for justice, which has anchored the nonviolent movements and reformers throughout history. As I noted last week, Kaur divides her book into three parts, and the three parts to becoming agents of revolutionary love. We seek to be love in a time of division and rage and fix a broken world while not breaking ourselves and even while trying to heal ourselves and others. The first 2 weeks, we looked at the idea to see no stranger and loving others. We looked at the teaching and awareness that a stranger is simply a part of ourselves that we do not know yet. And that's the embodiment of the Buddhist practice of universal compassion and the Christian tradition of following Jesus's commandment to love one another. So today we'll look at part 2, which is tend the wound and loving the opponent. And this is about how to heal ourselves so that we can learn to love our adversaries or what's considered the opposition, and then begin to reimagine a new world. So in part 1, See No Stranger, Kaur describes 3 practices that can help us learn to love others or strangers and come to see them as part of ourselves. The first is being willing to wonder about others and strangers, to keep our hearts and minds open, ask questions rather than making assumptions and judgments, and to have the desire to learn and understand. The second is being willing to grieve with others and strangers. That is allowing ourselves to feel empathy, to experience and share the pain and offer compassion, which breaks down barriers and creates meaningful connections. And the third practice is to choose to fight with and for all strangers. And that is to seek justice for all people, recognizing we must work together to change anything that will undermine the health and well-being of all. And having opened a way to consciously choose oneness with those who are a part of us and those that we don't know yet, Kaur shifts her focus to how we might learn to love those who appear to be enemies or opponents. So this part, Tend to the Wound and Loving the Opponents, is about doing just that, looking at our opponents, loving them, and knowing that we're all one. And in this section, there are also 3 practices. rage, listen, and reimagine. And today we're going to focus on how to embrace and constructively channel our anger, which can be challenging for many of us. Now, Core tapped into um, her deep programming when she admitted that as a good girl, she learned to bypass rage or subdue it as soon as it arose. Not only because it was an inappropriate emotion for a girl or a woman to have, but also because she believed that rage was the opposite of love. Now, I'm pretty sure most of us were not taught how to handle or how to express anger constructively. I certainly wasn't. We weren't allowed to be angry. The thing is, the opposite of love is not rage, it's indifference. And Cora explains in her words, love engages all our emotions. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger is the force that protects that which is loved. And we cannot access the depth of loving ourselves or others without our rage. Now, she goes into explaining that. And in other words, to become agents of revolutionary love, we have to embrace our shadow side as well as our light. And we need to love our whole selves in order to become an agent of revolutionary love. That means learning to embrace our own anger and rage in order to transform it into constructive energy that will deliver powerful, positive outcomes in the world. Now, she began this chapter on rage by sharing more of her personal and family story and the norms of her family and her culture. When she was a teenager, she had been molested by a cousin. Now, she fled to safety and confronted the boy the next day. But when he started crying, she ended up consoling him. So the energy shifted from her being angry to her taking care of him, which was the role of women in her culture. But the trauma and rage she buried that day had long-term effects. Now, her world would dramatically shift again late summer of 2004, just before she began graduate studies in religion and ethics at Harvard Divinity School. A political convention was taking place and anti-war protests were anticipated. A friend from Stanford called her and asked her if she would be willing to serve as a legal observer for the next day's protest. Her only role was to film the protest and mediate between the police and protesters whenever possible. She was there for safety. She was there to document it and be a safety net between the two sides. So she showed up wearing her green badge that read Legal Observer, National Lawyers Guild. To make a long story short, she was almost immediately caught up in a sweep arrest. Her ID was ignored, her camera thrown to the ground and shattered, and she was tightly handcuffed with sharp plastic ties and ushered into a van. She repeatedly shouted, "I'm a legal observer," but they chose to ignore her. The ties were so tight that she began losing feeling in her hands. And when confronted by a police lieutenant at the detention center where they had arrived, she started to ask if the ties could be loosened. But before she could finish, he circled around her, grabbed her wrists, and in her words, with one clean force, twisted them up hard. It felt like a knife, and I thought my hand had fallen off. Pain shot up the base of my skull like a gun shoved under my skin, and the world went black. When she came to, the cuffs were off and her hands were still there, but she had no feeling in them. And there were deep purple gashes across her veins. Once again, in her words, I had always thought my privilege, citizenship, education, literacy formed sort of a membrane of protection between the state violence. But as a brown woman, those privileges thinned to nothingness. In that moment, curled up on the floor of the cell, I knew I needed to access something deeper and more fiery in me if I was going to face this kind of Goliath. I just didn't know what it was or where to find it. And so, entering Harvard a week later, her hands still numb and splinted, her new quest began, learning to love her opponent. She was determined to overcome this trauma and reclaim her courage while practicing her faith's call to see no stranger. She journaled everything, first seeking to understand cruelty in general and the lieutenant who had hurt her specifically. But the more she read and thought she understood, the more she felt the pain in her wrist shooting up her arm into her shoulder and neck. Her injury wasn't healing, it was getting worse. Finally, after various doctor's visits and trying to move beyond the emotional pain, she went to an acupuncturist who told her, "You have to treat your own body with the same compassion as you treat others." But she couldn't. She still couldn't access compassion for herself. She only felt shame. She attended a loving kindness workshop after that, which was designed to cultivate the qualities of compassion for herself, for others, and for her opponents. And she was somewhat successful. However, as the guide led them to picture someone you consider an enemy, the lieutenant's face came into her mind and she panicked. And she got to a point where she had anxiety attacks, couldn't breathe, and had to run out of the room. She made several attempts at healing from the trauma, but a year after that arrest, the pain was now chronic. She continued on her path and attempted to love her enemy by practicing forgiveness. And she thought about the cousin who had molested her. Now, when the cousin found out that she was in a relationship with a Hindu and not a Sikh, because they were Sikhs, he made death threats against her partner. 6 months later, when she decided to visit home, her cousin called and wanted to meet to talk. Now, she really wanted to forgive him and move on, so she said yes, and she met him. Shortly after the meeting began, he pulled out a rifle. She managed to escape without physical harm, but needless to say, she was traumatized again. So here we see three. The first time her cousin molested her, the second time when she was arrested, and now this third time with the same cousin. Now, she hadn't called the police before because she didn't want to hurt her cousin, but she felt now that she had no other choice. And with the support of her parents and her brother, her cousin was arrested. But the beloved grandfather that she cherished declared she had shamed the family, and she was cast out. She was disowned. With that, she went back to her fiance's apartment in Los Angeles, but her panic attacks continued. And she continued to journal, and she began to learn that home is the space within us and between us where we feel safe. It's not a physical space. It's a field of being. So again, that feeling of safety comes from within us because we are always guided and supported through anything that we may experience. Now, after graduating from Harvard Divinity School, she put off law school for 2 years because she had no use of her right arm. She couldn't hold a pen. She couldn't turn a doorknob. She continued to do anything and everything she could to heal. And finally, her fiance took her to someone who was a trailblazer in healing historical trauma. This was Tommy Woon. Now, Tommy Woon explained that unresolved trauma is stored in our bodies and that we need to access emotions within us to reclaim our power. So he told her she needed to access the fiercest emotions and reclaim her power in her mind and her body. And the way of doing that was to create and experience a different story. So it's erasing what happened and creating from that a new story where she was the victor. So he guided her through several processes where she became fierce and was able to protect herself. She repeated the exercise for each trauma with each person who traumatized her. And she realized during each process that she wasn't destroying the men. She was destroying her projections of them as beasts with power over her. Now, this is really important to note. She was healing her perceptions of them. We know that everything we see is a projection of our mind, and we need to redraw that projection before we can change our perceptions and heal. Now, these men that hurt her out of their own wounds and their own sufferings. And we can't see the wounds of others until we attend and tend to our own words, our own wounds. And this requires accessing our own hurt, our own anger, our own rage. In owning her rage, she realized that just like mothers accessing rage to protect their children, processing her rage allowed her to be that mother to herself, allowed her to protect herself. It's an aspect of love that must be embraced and empowered to the fullest expression so that we can protect ourselves. And now we even have data to prove what healers have known all along, that repressing anger comes out. It comes at a cost to our health, resulting in high rates of autoimmune diseases and amplified perceptions of physical pain. Be aware, though, the opposite of repression is also dangerous because many people wear rage as a badge and use it against others. It's that justifiable anger, that justifiable rage. But justifiable anger and rage don't exist. The solution is not to suppress our rage or let it explode in violence. We must create a safe environment where we can process our rage without harming other people or ourselves. Very few of us were taught how to express anger or rage when we were growing up, so we all repressed it. But if we don't own it, it continues to build up until we, like a volcano, erupt and spew our ashes everywhere. And that's in the form of harsh words or even violence. In order to release it, we must first own it. That means whenever we're feeling judgmental or angry against another person or ourselves, we have the opportunity to really look at it and ask ourselves, what is this anger trying to tell me? What information does my rage carry? What is it telling me to do? How can I harness this energy into life-giving expressions rather than destructive ones? Now, if we really look at this and we answer those questions, these questions lead us back full circle, back to wonder. It moves us back to that simplicity and that innocence. It moves us back to learning and listening. And then we can reimagine our lives and the world around us. Owning our anger, owning our rage, looking at it, processing it, taking the time to heal from it, allows us to move back and be the true, innocent beings that we were born as. Leads us back to being the best Christ that we can be. expressing that in the world. And then truly, we will never see a stranger, only extensions of ourselves, because we are all extensions of God's love. So at this time, I invite you to close your eyes as we move into meditation. Just allow yourselves to breathe in life-affirming peace and release and breathe out fear and anger and resentment. With every breath you take, you feel more and more relaxed. And you just allow all the tensions in your body to be released. Feel all your muscles relaxing. And again, as you breathe in love. And as you breathe out fear. Most of us were not taught how to deal with anger, how not to process it, not allowed to feel it or process it and let it go. Most of us suppress that. And then as we continued on our path, we realized that stored anger and resentment only hurts us. And if we truly want to heal from this, we need to look at it, own it, accept it, and understand that everything we have ever experienced, regardless of how painful, regardless of how traumatic, has been there for us to learn and grow. Every experience is an opportunity, should we choose to look at it as that. That doesn't mean that pain doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that we ignore any trauma that we have experienced. It means that we move into the center of our beings and look at it and feel it and process it. It means that we let go of old way of thinking and open to new perceptions which offer new experiences. We are never alone. Divine Spirit within us is always there to guide us and move us through any pain that we may be experiencing. The only way to joy and everlasting peace is moving through whatever pain and sadness exists within us. We are divine by nature. We are divine by birth. We are divine expressions of God in the world. And we were meant to have joy, to be love, express that love, and accept love. So as we move into our own self-healing, we behold the divinity within us. We behold the divine in every person. We behold that we have been blessed with life experiences that have caused us to grow, develop, and overcome any challenges that we have experienced. We see no stranger, only a part of ourselves, blessed with the ability to love. And now I invite you to move deeper and deeper into the silence. and share with the Holy Spirit anything you would like to release. Hand it over to Spirit, and it will be removed. I know that any emotion that I may be feeling is about me. So I thank the Holy Spirit for helping me change my perception, for helping me release and let go of any negative influences that I have within me. And I go forth in the world, living from my Christ self, from a place of deep gratitude that Spirit is always there, always available to help me heal. And now I bring to mind anyone who may be in need of prayer, anyone on our unity prayer list, on Silent Unity's prayer list, and of all humanity. We affirm that there's a power and a presence within them that will see them through any obstacle that they may be dealing with. And we affirm their wholeness and oneness as we are all one. And now I invite you to bring your consciousness back into your body, back into the room where you are. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And now we move into the portion of the service where we have the opportunity to give. So I'd